Okay, let's go ahead and get started today. So again, thank you for joining us today for our Inclusion Infusion Elevating DE&R webinar. During our session today, we'll be covering a few different topics to include understanding the value that diversity, equity, and inclusion brings to an organization, sharing some recent stats and positioning to really help you see the impact and build the case for focused diversity strategy. And then from there, we're going to look at best practices on developing a recruitment strategy that really focuses and supports diversity and inclusion. And then we're going to end with the discussion around a few successful strategies that will help foster and grow diversity awareness in your own organization. So I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ashley Kauffman, the Senior Director of Client Services here at NAS Recruitment. And I'm joined by Molly Moses today, who is the Senior Talent Marketing Manager at JobsOhio. Molly, would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Ashley. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm super excited to be here this afternoon talking about these very important diversity initiatives with you all. Thanks, Ashley.
Perfect. All right, so before we dive in, I just wanted to give a little bit of detail of who NAS is. We are a recruitment ad agency specializing in storytelling, technology, and strategy. We have the great opportunity to work with clients all over the US and of all industry and sizes. And we have experience strategizing with top organizations to help build either from scratch or growing their existing diversity recruitment programs and efforts. And we want to share some of that learned industry experience with you today. So let's start with what DE&I means. There's a lot to consider, but in its simplest form, diversity is the representation or mix of various identities within a group. In the workplace, we often focus on specific identities such as gender, race, and disability, but we all hold really multiple identities and ways of relating to other people. Equity is upholding fairness and justice across all groups. And specific again to the workplace, it's all about developing policies, systems, and practices that provide fair access or opportunities to as many groups as possible. And it's important to note here also that equity is not level for all employees and really should be considered when looking at that. And lastly, inclusion means actively engaging, empowering, and valuing all people. It requires us to consider psychological safety, respect for different lived experiences, and the ability for people to share their authentic self. So when you think about DE&I as a whole, really it's important to ensure you're focused not only on the representation piece, right? Equity and inclusion are critical to the equation. And if these principles really aren't present within the organization, you won't have the benefit that comes with a diverse workforce. And what I mean by that is having a diverse workforce of people who don't feel safe to share ideas or who don't have equal access to opportunities, it's unlikely to improve your bottom line, which we're going to learn in a second is really one of the long-term benefits of having a strong DE&I program in your organization. So recently, a report from Zippia shared that racially and ethnically diverse companies have a 36% higher likelihood of financially outperforming less diverse companies. That's really because increased diversity means a wider range of perspectives and broader understanding that can positively impact creativity. Diverse teams are really less likely to fall into the same problem-solving patterns that emerge in homogeneous environments, really leading to a more innovative solutions, right? It encourages diverse thought. The next stat is from Glassdoor, and this shows that 76% of employees and job seekers actually say diversity is important when considering job offers. So job seekers, and really quite honestly, probably your own employees, want to know that their workplace values the same things that they do, right? They want to see that. They're vocal about diversity being a top priority, and by showcasing externally that you're listening and taking action to support, will not only help your recruitment, but really also your retention as well. The good news is, though, HR leaders are listening to that, right? They hear that this is what job seekers want. They know that job seekers are saying, they know what they're saying, and a recent report actually named diversity and equity and inclusion as a top priority in 2022. The issue is, though, there hasn't been much progress on the movement, unfortunately. Diversity progression at the leadership level is definitely behind. In the past 5 years, only 1 in 3 companies have made progress in executive team diversity. In fact, some even actually reversed their progress. And from about 2016 to 2022, globally, the proportion of women in leadership roles, and that includes vice president, C-suite, partner level, only increased by 3.6%, according to a recent report from McKinsey. So there's still a lot of work to be done specific to leadership growth and diversity as well. And speaking of leadership, in 2020, LinkedIn actually named Chief Diversity Officer as the fastest growing leadership position. In fact, almost 50% of companies on the S&P 500 index have a Chief Diversity Officer or equivalent, with 63% of those being appointed or promoted within the last 3 years. So a lot of movement in regards to a CDO. However, while the Chief Diversity Officer roles are in demand, turnover rates are very high. Organizations actually tend to have unrealistic expectations of the role, and as a result, aren't fully understanding how to assess the benefits of DE&I. So commonly, it was cited that a CDO or a Chief Diversity Officer left organizations because DE&I was either not prioritized, they weren't receiving additional leadership support, or they weren't given appropriate resources. So making sure that your organization understands the value in diversity is going to be critical here to make sure that we can then implement some of the strategies that we're going to talk about in just a second. So I want to take a minute and pause here and take a poll. It's going to appear in just a second for you, but while that's being set up, I wanted to ask, what do you think is the most diverse generation in US history? Is it baby boomers, Generation X, millennials, Generation Z, or Gen Alpha? So I'll give you just a second to complete that. All right, if you guessed Gen Z, then you are correct. They have actually been identified as the most diverse generation, with 52% identified as white, 1 in 4 or 25% as Hispanic, 14% as Black, 6% as Asian, and 5% identifying as another race or 2 or more races. So in comparison, 61% of millennials identified as white in 2002, again, compared to our 52% Gen Z. So this is important because Gen Zs start to enter the workforce. Their expectations of their employers may be different, right? From their parents, their grandparents, and even older siblings. With the youngest generation in the workforce, they want to work for companies that engage with social issues and really look to prioritize diversity as something of importance. So how do we create that diversity-centric strategy to make sure we're recruiting those top talent and staying candidate-centric? We're really going to focus on 3 key elements today and walk through some of these. So the first being creating an inclusive brand messaging that represents your organization. We'll then talk about how to externally implement this message. And then lastly, how to measure it, right? Creating a scorecard for success and really looking at continual improvement. So let's focus first on brand messaging. We know that having a genuinely inclusive working environment is key, not only to retaining current staff, but really attracting that new talent. And this can be expressed, again, through your brand messaging. So when we're thinking about creating an inclusive employment brand, it's really important to remember a few key elements in this discovery process. So one, really always trying to understand and keep in mind your employees' lived experiences. So this gives them a unique perspective to share and something that you definitely want to seek out and understand. Number two, surveys are also very helpful to understand and learn from your employees. So be sure that when distributing these surveys, you reach a diverse group of people and are extending it out to capture a sampling across all individuals. Incorporating and garnering feedback from your development programs or your affinity resource groups are also a great tactic to really ensure your brand messaging is inclusive to all, and oftentimes an untapped resource from the organization that can help to build some of that inclusivity. Imagery also plays a huge part in creating an inclusive brand. So a few things to remember here when you're thinking about imagery is one, ensuring representation across all is present, right? You want to be sure that you have and are representing all different types of employees of a diverse background. As well, keep in mind authenticity, right? So if possible, photo shoots using actual employees are going to be best. It really brings out that level of authenticity and allows you to not use stock imagery to visually represent what that message looks like. As well, it gives you a little bit more flexibility because you're creating the photos versus being stuck to what somebody else had created to fit inside inclusivity brand messaging at your organization. And then lastly, and a big piece here is execution is everything, right? So once your brand messaging is created, you go through that process, which is really a great learning experience for the organization. You want to then create a go-to-market plan, right? To ensure that this great messaging, this authenticity that you've identified and brought to light is fully represented out in the marketplace, again, to produce the most impact in support of your recruitment efforts. So I want to share today a few ideas on how we can and how you can successfully implement that brand messaging externally, while also, again, recruiting that top talent, right? So this is going to include a couple things, whether it be looking at top sources, focusing on referrals, or ensuring that your brand messaging or your inclusive messaging is carried out both on your job descriptions externally, but also on your career site as well. Given that's where we know a lot of candidates start their search. So let's talk about referrals and sources. Commonly, as you guys probably are aware, referrals is really the #1 source for hired candidates, right? It's very likely that members of your team will have networks of people with similar backgrounds to them. So creating a diverse candidate referral program is a great way to both boost your diversity recruitment strategy, but also showcase that your company values different backgrounds and ideas. So utilizing a unique messaging for your employee referral program is a great way to highlight that diverse effort while also encouraging the actual recruitment element as well. Another great way to ensure that your talent pool is really full of diverse candidates is to source from a variety of different places. Now, what that means is you shouldn't rely on the same sources over and over again when seeking out new candidates. I know that might be difficult because a lot of times we're tight on time, we need candidates, and you maybe have 1 or 2 top sources that are your go-to, that you always get candidates that you can look at. But I would challenge that and say, look for opportunities to source diverse candidates where potentially those types of candidates feel connected. So for example, there are many online and offline groups associated or associations dedicated to women in technology, right? So increasing your partnerships with these types of organizations, whether that be offering internships, utilizing targeted ads. A lot of them have events that maybe you can sit on and be a part of their speaking panel. These could all be great sources to connect with candidates directly instead of waiting for them to apply through, again, some of those top sources, maybe like Indeed, for example. The more you take the initiative to find these types of channels, the more likely it is that your talent pool is going to be expanded beyond the existing and really increase some of that diverse reach as well. Job descriptions also and messaging play a big part in your external messaging as well. So it's really recommended when you think about what to do is to complete an audit of your recruitment ads. And this is really to ensure you're being inclusive to help appeal to candidates from, again, different backgrounds, right? So things you want to consider when you look at this is using inclusive language in your job descriptions, ensuring that you speak directly to candidates and encourage a wider pool of people to apply. So again, you want to strive to avoid words that feel exclusive or carry gender bias. We have a couple of examples here today, just of things that you may want to include versus excluding aggressive, ambiguous, ambitious, of things to consider. Another piece that I want to point out is DE&I statements are also typically located at the bottom of company descriptions. A lot of times it's just part of the company closer, or if you have a boilerplate of some sort, it really should be towards the top to emphasize, again, that importance of DE&I that your organization is making as well. Again, we know from earlier in some of those stats, this is important, right? It's something that job seekers are searching out. So make it easy for them to find, have it at the top of your job description and showcase that commitment to really encourage that application and increase that awareness for the candidate. Lastly, you may want to consider including, again, in that statement or commitment that you have to DE&I, something that welcomes candidates from all backgrounds. So, definitely looking to a statement that encourages applications from maybe communities that maybe historically underrepresented or something along those lines. Again, just to help with that inclusivity element and reiterating that commitment that you have. I think we all know that having a diverse representation on your career site is also critical, right? So again, your career site represents your organization. It's the top source that candidates go to for information. And there's a lot of opportunity there, right? So organizations can highlight their commitment to diversity in a few ways here. But having a dedicated DE&I page is a great starting place if you don't have anything. So this is really where you can showcase your ERPs or employee referral programs, your associate resource groups, existing partnerships, and really bring to life, again, that inclusive focus. Here's an example that NAS actually helped to create for a client partner of ours, Papa John's, which we developed focused content and highlighted the value and importance that DE&I plays within their organization. And here's just another great example of a healthcare organization. Again, one that truly portrays a commitment to DE&I care source. So NAS supported on the creation of various DE&I pages within their career site that showcase a number of different things, from leadership support, including messages from their CEO and C-level suite to, again, reiterate that commitment from top down. The company's diversity strategies that were implemented with a goal of giving visibility to candidates, again, on that commitment that this is something that they have top of mind and is a priority. And then, even having a tracker page, and that's what you kind of see here, that provides measurements into their goals and how ultimately they're delivering. So they're not just about talk, they're about doing, and really providing that transparency to candidates and employees. And this actually takes us into the last element of creating a diversity-centric strategy, which is focusing on your scorecard. So a diversity scorecard provides an organization with a way to essentially keep track of its metrics, right, and to track progress. Each organization's scorecard will look different. So I want to make sure that you understand that there's not a one size fits all. It really depends on the metrics that you choose and what's important to you in your measurement. But to help identify what your scorecard should look like, a good first step is going to be to ask yourself, why does my organization even want to create a diversity and inclusive workplace, right? What's your goal here? What's the driving factor? So depending upon your answer, it can help you to identify what metrics would be appropriate for you to start to measure. I have a couple of examples here, but again, for example, if your focus is purely, let's say, profitability driven, and we saw that can be a huge factor, right? We know that stats share with us that a diverse workforce increases companies' bottom lines. Looking at ROI numbers compared to the organization's workforce and creating a correlation between those two numbers is definitely something you're going to want to be included in your specific scorecard. There's also a lot of different things that you can measure, though, beyond those core areas, right? So some additional metrics can be more focused on, let's say, increasing innovation, right? And that can be through the process improvement or potentially reviewing engagement through, and I think of employee engagement, right? That's on the slide, through output, or if you measure profit per employee. So there's a lot of different things that you can look at depending upon what your goal is. By incorporating DE&I, it really will help to drive the metrics to evaluate and improve upon. So creating a diverse centric strategy takes a lot of effort and dedication. We kind of just talked through a couple of different elements, but really just to keep it simple, one of the biggest things to remember for successful implementation is to remember to keep it a top priority. Again, we saw earlier that oftentimes companies say they want to do it, they have it in place, but there's limited movement or action taken. So here's a couple of just quick tips that you can do just to try to keep DE&I a top priority at your organization. So the first thing is make it a team effort, right? Gain more insights and attractions. So by getting feedback, support, even getting a commitment from the executive team is really going to be an important step in helping to make real change happen and ensuring this doesn't lose priority. You can also create a DE&I committee, right? So this could be a small group potentially made up of leaders, managers, team members who collaborate on ways to promote diversity in the workplace. Again, with a goal ensuring that it stays top of mind. I also like to get inspired by other companies. So diversity is a group effort, as we just kind of talked about. But when I say that, think of it as organizations of all sizes and industries are making this a priority and shifting their focus here. So don't recreate the wheel, right? Look at what others are doing to be inspired and get new ideas for your own company to try to implement and move that needle. And then lastly, and I think this is one of the most important ones, be honest, right? I'll say even seasoned leaders can struggle with understanding how to commit to creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace. So just be realistic about where your company stands, how it plans to improve, and then the progress it's going to make, because that's what's really going to give you the most impact and allow you to see the change that you want to see, as long as you know exactly where you're at and be honest about the whole process. So I'm going to now pass it over to Molly, and she's actually going to speak a little bit about strategies and how to foster and grow diversity awareness at your organization and what she's learned with being with JobsOhio as well. So Molly, do you want to start us?
Yes. Thank you so much, Ashley. So I'm going to talk, like she said, just briefly about successful strategies for fostering and growing diversity within your organization. And I'm going to touch on some of the same things that Ashley mentioned and just dig a little deeper. But I love one of her last points that mentioned being honest. So starting with an assessment of the current level of awareness of diversity and inclusion within your organization is going to be really important. Ashley mentioned launching a survey. Anonymous surveys are great to get a pulse on the understanding and the level of awareness, not just of diversity within your organization, but just DE&I in general. So anonymous surveys help people to feel more comfortable about how they are answering and give them the ability to be honest about their current level of awareness. Another great tactic is to have conversations or small group discussions with employees that have expressed interest around diversity within your organization. There tend to naturally be groups or subsets of folks within your organization that are more engaged in this topic and may already be talking about it. So leverage those employees that have expressed interest and bring them into the conversation. Another thing that's vitally important is to identify areas of growth. Again, this goes back to being honest about where your organization currently sits with diversity. Don't be afraid to start small. You don't have to go from 0 employee resource groups or affinity groups to launching 10 all at the same time. You can start with these smaller conversations. And I want to encourage you to think past the basics of race, gender, and identity. Think about neurodiverse or divergent employees and talent. There may be groups around faith-based people who identify and belong to certain faith-based groups, parents or those who are caring for others, even mental health awareness. We currently are in the month of April, and April is Stress Awareness Month. So wellness initiatives are a great way to lean into inclusivity at your organization. Wellness initiatives should be very much a part of your organization's DE&I strategies. But again, don't be afraid to start small. And as Ashley was mentioning, engaging leadership and key stakeholders, because we know that these initiatives have to start from the top down. So making sure you have the buy-in and engagement of leadership and key stakeholders within your organization is going to be vital in fostering that growth internally. We're going to move on to talk a little about belonging. Belonging really is the root of inclusion. And what we want to be careful of is that we're not just focusing on diversity within numbers and within representation. So, we have 50% women or 50% people of color. That is all well and good. And like Ashley was saying, it really does help with the bottom line. Diverse pools of talent and teams have proven to be more profitable for companies. But within that, we need to understand that those people need to feel included and feel like they belong. That is what causes people to stay at organizations. So you don't just want to attract the talent, but you want to get them to stay, and belonging and inclusion really is the root of that. We want to embrace differences while also focusing on unity. That's really the foundation of how you're going to cultivate inclusivity, because we are all very different. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that we have one thing in common. We are all human. So that's a baseline for inclusivity and belonging. Again, ask questions and engage willing participants within your organization of those more marginalized groups. We have to be careful with making assumptions based on outside perspectives. When we do that, we can create narratives that may be misaligned with how other people actually feel. So asking ourselves questions like, I wonder if Black or Brown employees would like this, or I wonder how women feel if we would implement this, rather than assuming, you should just ask them. It's simpler. Always approach conversations with an open mind and a genuine desire to learn. We find that marginalized populations welcome questions, but it's all in the spirit of how you approach and the intent behind why you're asking. But we do not have to make it scary or have to make it a lofty thing just to have a conversation. So just be sure to approach those conversations with an open mind. Moving ahead, we want to set actionable goals, and Ashley touched on this a little bit too. Defining the why, aligning with the why within your organization. Your organization probably has some sort of values that line up to diversity, equity, and inclusion, even if you may not have that strategy defined internally by name. Many organizations' values and missions is centered around people and the advancement of people, and a lot of times DE&I initiatives can roll right up into that. But when people within your organization understand the purpose of why you are launching things internally and why you're talking about the awareness of diversity and inclusion, they're more likely to engage when they can reconnect back to that purpose. So talking about what you want to achieve and starting with internally and asking questions about why are we doing this and what do we look to achieve. Some examples of some goals might be, are you looking to develop, expand, or communicate the work of employee resource groups or affinity groups? So many large organizations have defined employee resource groups, but you may be able to expand those, or if your company does not yet have those, starting with a couple, identifying a few of those that internal employees can engage with and be a part of. If your organization does already have those in place, thinking about that communications strategy and asking yourself, how well do we communicate what happens in these groups, and the work that is being done within them can be really helpful to communicate that information out. You could be looking to improve employee engagement results. So maybe your company has launched an employee engagement survey and the results were less than stellar. So a good goal is, what can we do internally to foster inclusivity and belonging to help get those engagement results up? Some other goals might be around providing more resources for marginalized populations within your organization. Again, this goes back to thinking beyond the basics, but there may be prayer spaces identified for people of faith, or support systems for parents or lactating mothers, making sure that there are appropriate spaces for those needs that need to be thought about. Creating spaces and allowing for observances for cultural holidays and celebrations. Again, this all rolls back up into assessing your current level of awareness of diversity within your organization, and understanding the people that actually work with you and for you, and making sure there are appropriate things and systems and supports in place for them to feel included. I think lastly, we want to talk about, and Ashley touched on much of this as well, but thinking about externally and how you need to communicate your level of awareness and your initiatives that are happening internally, communicating that externally. So doing an audit of external communications, your external communications, to ensure that awareness of your internal efforts is communicated appropriately. You could be doing some great things internally internally, but if there is no external communication strategy linked to that, those prospective employees or candidates that Ashley was talking about, they may not have any idea that your company is very committed to fostering diversity within your organization. So it's vitally important that you develop a strategy around communicating that externally. Talent acquisition, human resources, marketing, and communications teams should all be aligned internally on the external communications goal. Again, this goes back to effectively communicating what you're doing internally, externally, so that the people that sit within your organization are not the only ones that have an understanding of what your values and commitments are when it comes to diversity. A person feeling welcomed or valued at your organization will often begin with what they see externally, how they engage with your social channels and what they see on your website. And if that is not an accurate representation, there may be an assumption that your company does not have that internal commitment. Your organization, if you may be unsure about where to begin with the external part of this communication, Ashley mentioned this as well. Look to other companies that are doing this well within your industry. Look to their websites and their social channels to see how they are talking externally about what they are doing internally to spread that content more broadly. Again, you don't want to recreate the wheel here. There are some companies that are doing this very well. And if you desire to be leaders in the forefront of communicating and really adhering to these diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, it really does have to be a strategic approach. And like Ashley said, it's a lot of work. It's lofty goals to enhance the work that is being done in this spaces, but being very tactical about it and approaching one task at a time, engaging those willing team members is always a great place to start. So thank you so much, Ashley, for allowing me to join in and share today. I'm going to pass it back over to Ashley to help wrap us up.
Oh, thank you, Molly. That was really helpful insights, and appreciate you sharing that from your experiences as well. So I know we covered a lot today with just a few minutes left. There's so much, again, to continually learn when it comes to DE&I. We did just want to call out a few key takeaways to consider as you really strive, right, to elevate DE&I in your organization. One being that diversity obviously is important to an organization's success, right, in achieving organizational and financial goals. Keep in mind that diversity strategies take many forms, right? We talked about a lot of that today with various components, but one of the biggest pieces is communication, right? Communicating is going to be key to success for you. Measurement is everything. So be sure that you're creating a diversity scorecard to help stay focused and accountable. Again, this will keep it top of mind and really help to provide some of that ROI as you continue to position the top leaders in the organization to answer the why, right? Why are we doing this? This is why. And then lastly, again, be sure to assess your organizational awareness. Molly talked us through a lot about that, about how to identify and understand that, but really focusing on both internal and external goal settings to make sure that you're in alignment with success. So I want to leave you with this statement: diversity is having a seat at the table. Inclusion is having a voice, and belonging is having that voice be heard. So we, both Molly and myself, appreciate everyone's time today. If there are any questions that we weren't able to address during, or if you'd like to discuss more about how to create a diversity-centric recruitment strategy, please feel free to reach out directly. Here's our contact information. And again, we thank you all for joining us today and appreciate the time. Thanks so much.